Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar. I'm Jenny Bailey from the Agile Business Consortium. We're the not-for-profit member organisation who are leading, promoting and enabling business agility worldwide. As with all our webinars, we're recording this broadcast, so everyone who's registered will receive this in the follow-up email. Now, for this webinar, we're changing tack slightly, and so we're happy to take questions throughout this webinar. So please feel free to type your questions in the box, and I'll try and take as many as I can and actually integrate them throughout the presentation. And also, as normal, there'll also be an opportunity at the end of the webinar for further questions if time permits. So let's crack on. So my guest this morning is Alan Furlong, who works with the Consortium in our Agile Culture and Leadership work group. Alan has for some time been fascinated in what makes us tick as human beings. What is it that enables an agile leader? And even what is an agile leader? Obviously, it's collaboration, commitment, communication. They all play their part as the 3 C's of agile leadership. But how do these elements actually work in practice at an effective level? And how is this received? So when I was looking at running a webinar on this topic, really there was only one person who could help us bring all these elements together, and he's laughing at the moment in the studio. But this is what I thoroughly believe, because obviously we've worked together, we've talked a lot. So yeah, there was one person that could help us. So I'm delighted to say that Alan Furlong is in the studio with us. So welcome, Alan.
Thanks.
Good morning.
Thanks a million. That's a lovely thing to say.
Well, it is true though, isn't it? You are fascinated by what makes people tick.
Yes.
And you've done lots of presentations on this, and you opened my eyes incredibly to the knowledge that you have, and obviously the books that you've read, the authors and the insights that you have. So I think it's really quite interesting. I mean, how long have you been fascinated with this? And tell us a little bit about it.
So my background's a kind of not a normal one. I was in the corporate world and had an HR title, but worked very much like a project manager and looked after thousands of staff in a large financial services institution. And that's when I realized that 90% of my time supporting managers and leaders was about people issues. And then when I set up my own businesses, it was probably about 8 years ago when I got really serious about trying to understand what really makes people thrive and flourish. And that was because I was doing Agile back then, but I didn't have that title. I mean, when you're an entrepreneur and you're building businesses, you're trying to deliver something every week, and it's an iterative process. So it was during that time when I burned out, and that's the moment when you start looking at, well, hold on a second, what really makes us flourish? How can we be at our best every day without killing ourselves in the process? So by accident, I found positive psychology. And that was the start of realizing there's actually a kind of a variety of sciences that have really blossomed over the last 15 years that are focused entirely on this very topic. What brings the best out of us individually, as leaders, or as a team collectively.
Okay. All right. Now, you're also working with the Agile and Culture Leadership Group, aren't you? The working group that we have here at the Consortium. You've been working with us for some time.
Yes.
Now, in the introduction, I mentioned the 3 C's, the collaboration, the commitment, the communication, and they obviously play their part in leadership, don't they? And what we've done, we've actually put a white paper together a couple of years ago regarding Agile leadership, the 9 principles of Agile leadership. Can you just inform us a little bit how that all came about? Because there was a huge amount of research that went into that, wasn't there?
So yes, it was part of what I would call a meta-analysis, where we looked at what, I suppose, the best thought leaders and actual practitioners, because I think that's kind of more important. What are people really doing on the ground that's actually having traction? And we sort of we drew all of this data together, and the same themes came up over and over and over again. And they may be described in different terms, but they are fundamentally the same principles that come up. And so we did the hard work where most of us don't have the time to sort of chunk through all of this data. So we did that hard work and identified 9 clear principles, of leadership that work within an agile context. I think that's really important. So that's really the background to how it came about.
Okay, all right. And it's obviously an evolving set of principles as well, isn't it?
I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think like anything in Agile, nothing is nailed to the wall, and leadership is changing as we speak. And these 9 principles we think are kind of universal truths, but those universal truths will no doubt change, or what's in each one will change for sure. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's an evolving process.
Okay, now we've got a surprise also, because your partner's joining us this morning. So we've got Matt Roadnight on the line. So welcome, Matt, and thank you for joining us this morning as well. It's great to have you with us. You're a partner in Sherpa People Systems with Alan, aren't you?
That's right, I am, yes.
Well, could you give us a little bit of background on Sherpa People Systems and your experience in this field as well? That would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So I've been doing Agile since about 2004. I'm a Scrum trainer. And about 2006, 2007, I got involved with organizations that want to be more Agile. And so lots of large transformations for big organizations like Aviva, Thomson Reuters, Visa, to name a few. And I think around about 2014, I've been through quite a few of these. I've seen quite a few challenges, I think. I kind of having the process conversation about frameworks was quite interesting to take us so far, and a lot of Agile frameworks talk about people and the collaboration side of it, but are quite light on how to go about that. So I started the journey really, and I went on an executive coaching course to become an executive coach and life coach. So I coach a few people still, and I also got introduced from that to something called relationship coaching, how to coach a relationship between people and improve that, and that was interesting too, but it wasn't quite the whole story. And I kind of get involved in other conversations, and that's when I kind of met Alan really around that time. And what was interesting, he became another bit of the jigsaw really, which is about, like I said, what makes people tick. And it was quite interesting, more of a sciencey stuff rather than some of the coaching stuff that was behind some of that. So what's been interesting the last couple of years working with Alan is really digging out some really useful techniques and tools and things to use to help sort of and lead individual people there really. So that's kind of where I come from. I think it was a bit of a meeting of minds, and just finding that actually most Agile frameworks kind of try and force collaboration, but there's quite a lot of people missing the people side, the skills side of things. I think that's kind of where Alan and I met and have started to explore since then.
Okay, well, no, thank you for that introduction, Matt. We appreciate that. Obviously, also you're facilitating our coaching corner, aren't you, at the conference in September? So it's wonderful that you're going to be managing that process for us, because I think we've got about 14 coaches there. So you're going to be busy, Matt, that's for sure.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay, so this morning's webinar is all about Agile leadership, and really I believe that's such a vast topic, because obviously it comes into all those elements we've discussed. It comes into also the elements of people, and people are so diverse, and I long may that continue in my understanding, because if we change from being diverse, then we become more like robots, and I'm far from that idea. I want us to stay as diverse and to have as much variety as we can. But in terms of Agile leadership, that poses us with quite a question, doesn't it, in terms of what is a leader, and how best to actually put your foot forward really when you are a leader. And it takes a lot of different elements to come together, doesn't it? Matt? Alan, can you help me with that one?
So, sorry, Matt. The short answer is, I think we're in probably one of the most exciting times, certainly of my career, because it's a time of enormous change. Peter Senge, the sort of systems thought leader, talks about the fact that we're in the midst of shifting from one age to another, and we're shifting from this perception that organizations are mechanistic, that Tayloristic view, to seeing organizations for what they really are, which is organic. And that is a profound change for in terms of leading. That means we have to change how we lead. So, but it's a pervasive model, I think, and we kind of hope that leading a group of people is like servicing an engine, where we just take a part out and put a new part in and everything works well. Yeah. But all of us in this webinar, and everybody, particularly who's listening, know that it just isn't that simple. So we're moving from command and control, and beyond even coaching, and I would say even beyond servant leadership principle, even though those principles are phenomenal. to what, Matt and I call sort of leading in emergence. And emergence is this process that systems have of this constant process of change. And that could be expansion as well as contraction and so on and so forth. So to be able to lead in that kind of environment is a wholly different skill set to what I grew up with, which is basically just do as you're told and get on with your job. So Matt, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
I think what's interesting there, Alan, is like I say, it's a change, and it's a cultural change, maybe how most leaders work currently in most organisations.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting whenever change emerges, that basically it affects the individual, and there's some resistance to that change. It needs some support around that as well. And not every organisation provides that support to be able to make that shift, really. That's an interesting perspective, really, from all leaders, at how to let your organisation, how to have your organisation supporting that change as well, and encouraging that change.
Okay, no, really interesting points there. I'm interested to look at this. This is what a Zen garden, isn't it, that we're looking at on screen currently?
Yes.
And there's not much flourishing going on in a Zen garden, is there?
There is a lot of organic processes that are going on, and I think the gardener metaphor, which has been used often to describe what a leader is in this new kind of world, is a good metaphor. But I suppose I used that image very deliberately because it's not chaos, and I think that's important. We are in an organizational setting, and although organizations are organic, the truth of the matter is that they're not chaotic. So if you think of a family, there are still boundaries. Do you know what I mean?
There has to be.
There has to be.
Speaking of the mother, there definitely has to be.
Yeah, I hope you're not getting too command and control there, Jenny. But it's true, right? So,
yes.
But it's emergent, right? So families are constantly changing. As all of us who've had children, who see them between the ages of 1 and 11, just changing constantly. And just when you think you've got everything nailed down, another one comes along, and the toolkit you try to apply to them just doesn't seem to work, right? So it's an emergent process, but there's still what Matt would call container principles, and I think that's incredibly important. So we didn't use a sort of wild jungle metaphor. I think where we are right now is more like a Zen garden. It may get slightly more kind of wild as time goes on, but that's kind of, I think, a good metaphor for where we are now. What are your thoughts, Matt?
I think just to add to that, so I talk about container principles quite a lot. I borrowed that from a lady called Glenda Ouyang, who wrote a white paper on this around about 2001, separately from the Agile world, really. I quite like the model because it's simple. She talks about sort of 3 elements to the model for self-organization in any system. That's not just Agile teams. If that's any human system, need 3 things to self-organize. One's a container, needs some boundaries around which to sort of self-organize within. So even at a country level, we have those laws and restrictions, as it were, so we sort of self-organize within. Also needs to be differences, so differences within people inside the system. The greater differences, the more sort of dynamics are going to go on, the more tensions going on. And you need exchanges, so times to sit around where times where the system interacts and reflects on where they are. And I think that's those exchanges, longer sort of differences in exchanges lead to slower emergence, and faster emergence comes from those exchanges. So any of you that understand any much about Scrum or Agile framework especially, is Scrum brings quite a few of those together, having a container around the time box and the output, and the difference inside the cross-functional teams, and then the exchanges, various times review what you're building, and also the teams reflect as well. So it's interesting is a lot of Agile frameworks bring sort of encourage those 3 principles: container, differences, and exchanges, from Glenda Ouyang too.
Okay, all right. No, those are interesting elements. I mean, obviously we're looking at what is leadership, and I mean, what I get from the Zen garden is a lot of peace going on, a lot of peace, tranquility, and space. I mean, and those analogies in leadership, how do you see that working?
So that's not really what the metaphor is about, because anybody who leads will know there's sometimes not a lot of peace. I think why we use the term leading in emergence is that ability to relinquish authority. I think that's profoundly important, to relinquish authority. And so what we've been taught from school, from our parents, from our early career days, etc., is there is an authority figure and they have all the answers. What is changing quite profoundly is actually there's a lot of wisdom in the team. and we have to have the wisdom then to be able to relinquish authority, and that's important. One of the things that came out from Sengi's work over the last few years is that the number one lesson he's learned about organizations that have successfully changed and maintained that change have done it from line managers.
Right.
Never once has it happened top down.
Wow, really?
Not once. So if you listen to him talking, not once top down, it's always from line managers, sustainable change. And he said the other element to successful change occurring and being sustained is what he calls these internal networkers, these seeds, these people who go out within the organization. So start small and you go out within the organization and they sort of engender a desire to keep the change process going. And then it's blessed by an executive at the senior level. So they're the three elements. So that's really important. I think that, again, is, what is leadership? We've traditionally thought it's an executive and they have all the answers. The moment we think that, it means that it disallows all of the other wisdom in the organization. What we're now seeing is the reverse of that. That, when we relinquish authority, we allow then, that wisdom to show up. And as we have seen from Sengi's work, this is how great things happen. Okay.
Matt, would you like to add to that at all?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about all the peace and harmony piece is quite interesting, because I think Patrick Lencioni talks about 5 dysfunctions of a great team. And the second one is healthy conflict. I think what's interesting is if there are signals for change, are usually emotional. There's emotional stuff, things happening. So I think, and their conflict tends to happen, which is handled badly. I suppose there's sort of 2 different ranges of conflict. There's dysfunctional harmony, everything's fine. And then you've got personal attacks. And in between there's some healthy conflict where the team have a safe space to be able to discuss things, or anyone, and actually bring things up. And I think it's important then that everyone in that system, if you like, is heard, or all voices of systems heard. I think that comes from an approach called deep democracy, and from that you can really start to drive emergent change. It's going to get a bit messy, but it does mean that as a leader, you're bringing everyone with you, and I think it supports the bottom-up side of things as well. And I think what's interesting is about the signals for change are really can get quite emotional. Things need to change. Handled badly, the kind of emotions that do come up mean that actually we don't always work collaboratively that well together. And so I think as a leader, encouraging the right behaviors between people will encourage greater collaborative working together going forward. But not everyone really knows what it means to have a healthy relationship and what that needs too.
Yeah, it's interesting you pick up on that point. Alan and I were talking about similar things yesterday, actually, in terms of leadership, and the fact that I gave him a question about, what would be your 5 top tips to be an agile leader, or even to be a good leader, because a good leader and an agile leader, they cross over in some respects. It was a big overarching question, obviously, and Alan could have gone in all directions, but he kind of put his hands up to it, didn't you? You just went, too big.
well, it is, because I think it depends on the person. But there was one kind of definite top tip, and that was you need to go on a journey of personal development.
That's right.
I think what's really changed, if because I'm a big fan of if we're doing a webinar, can you just give me something practical I can grab onto,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So the one big change that's happening is that we just need to understand people better. We have this idea that when we walk into an organization, that people that come into that organization come in from the shoulders up. They are employees. When the truth of the matter is the person that walks into that organization comes in completely as a human being, as a person, with all of the complexity that goes with that. To be able to lead well means you need to know yourself first. And this, I'm sure 10 years ago, everybody went, oh, this sounds like woo-woo tree hugger stuff. But the truth of the matter is to have high emotional intelligence, to be empathetic, to understand what really makes your team tick and how to get the best out of them. Because you can't motivate anyone. You can only create the context within which people choose to motivate themselves. That can only come from wisdom. and wisdom isn't learned in a spreadsheet.
No, absolutely not.
So personal development, number one, I would say if somebody really wanted to be great at leading, then start that journey. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who've already started that journey and realized the benefits of it.
So it's kind of a journey of self-discovery to understand yourself better before you can put yourself into that position to lead. Is that what you think?
Absolutely. And it's an inside-out process. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are tools of leadership that are still important. Okay, but when Matt or I ever ask, go back to a time when you were in a great team. Tell me a little bit about the leader. They don't say that he was a great strategist or she was brilliant at process. She listened. She gave us the opportunity to stretch our wings. I grew personally. I grew professionally. This has nothing to do with systems and process.
Sure.
So all of the leader. I mean, the funniest thing is the flip side of that is when we're under pressure, we default to a leadership style that we used to feel comfortable with.
Absolutely.
Right. And so for me, it's immediately go into command and control because that's what I learned from my dad. And everybody will kind of resonate with that. All of a sudden we're under pressure. Just do as you're told and do this and do that, but if you're unaware of that, that causes chaos. When you're self-aware, then you realize that's one of your default settings when you're under pressure. And when you are self-aware, then you can choose to operate differently. So that's a really simple kind of story, but it's one that's actually personally true of me. I'm much more aware of the fact that when I'm under pressure, I get a bit grouchy and a bit feisty. And so, I need to change my style a little bit when that happens.
I think there's a lot of people on here that can relate to that because I can too, definitely, especially with my children again. Definitely the command and control creeps in because probably that's from my culture, how I was brought up. And like you said, your culture, it just comes back, doesn't it? It's your default sort of system, if you like, that you rely on when you're stressed, like you say.
It is, and there's something in psychology that's at play. We feel safer when we're doing that because we feel we have some sense of control.
Okay.
And as human beings, safety is a profoundly important motivator, if you want. It's profoundly important to our well-being, psychological safety. And so the reason why we do that, not excusing it all of the time, but the reason why we go into that kind of default setting is we feel safer. Somehow we've taken control. But the flip side is if one of your team are witnessing that all of the time, you're removing any sense of authority or inclusion, and it actually has the opposite effect. So, so there you go.
It's so interesting talking about the dynamics in this because from the simple words of being a leader, I would think it's more of an external practice. But it's amazing that you're saying, the first top tip, if you like, or one of the major tips to actually look at is internally.
Yeah.
Look at your sort of mechanisms, look at how you operate, look at how you are. So it's very much more of an internal process to get a good understanding of you. And then once you're at ease with yourself and know that you're being the best self that you can be possibly, then people will follow, I guess, and be inspired.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is rocket science either.
No,
this has been around for thousands of years. I mean, you'll see this in the military as well as, not-for-profits and for-profit organizations and everything in between in schools. The best teachers are people who, have a tremendous amount of what I would call wisdom. The Oprah Winfreys of this world are not Oprah Winfreys just because they've got lots of great strategies. It's because they have tremendous wisdom.
Fair enough. Matt, would you like to add anything to that discussion?
Wow, yeah. So, blimey, yeah, no, I do. I think what's interesting there is I think a few points come up for me around the control piece. And I think what's interesting about most organizations is that they tend to try and get control by focusing on specialisms. Yeah. And most organizations will be sort of driven, if you like, by specialist areas. And I think what's interesting there is to try and get anything done in an organization generally involves all types of specialisms. And I think sometimes the organizational structure doesn't even support that. I think what's interesting there is it comes back to if you've got quite a stressful environment, there's a healthy level of stress and you go a bit beyond that, people tend to shut down and revert back to type, as it were. I think as Europeans generally, or sort of Westerners generally, we are quite individualistic in our approach and will default to sort of telling rather than actually supporting. I think people just like to feel valued generally. And what I try and talk an awful lot about organizations being more agile is to try and change that container from being individualistic or around specialisms to containers that go end-to-end across organizations, but also I think you still got to deliver some value. So understanding what that value would be, what the outcome might be, and defining that well as a container, and let people self-organize with inside that, and be engaged with inside that to solve problems rather than telling them what to do.
Okay, so we're talking about that human consciousness level, aren't we, really? Like you say, the internal, everyone looking at themselves first and organising themselves. And obviously Frederick Laloux really gets into that, doesn't he, Alan?
Yeah, so if you bring up the diagram, I mean, this is a metaphor that Matt and I use every now and then. And like any metaphor, it's not meant to be 100% accurate. And what Laloux really is describing here, the sort of the conclusion of his thinking is that as our collective consciousness has kind of grown and evolved, so as our organizational models, and where we are now, according to Lou, is in that orange band. So still very much in the sort of mechanistic world, which is the large corporations and are focused on innovation, but it's all about competition and profit. Where we're moving to is the sort of the green world, the Ben and Jerry's of this world. You see Agile and Lean are in there. Where you've got culture over strategy and empowerment. What's interesting about that world is something that we haven't touched on yet, actually, is the importance of employee experience. So the importance of how happy employees are, because now the research is in, it wasn't there 15 years ago, that when Sonia Lubomirsky, who wrote The How of Happiness, she did a meta-analysis with Ed Diner, and they proved that, and it's not rocket science, but happier people, they're more productive, they're better at selling, they're more likely to get promoted, they're better leaders, and so on and so forth. And we're not just talking about the emotion of happiness. It's a scientific idea of happiness, which means they've got a sense of meaning and purpose, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's where we are in the green world. And Teal is an anti-fragile organization. We won't talk about that in this webinar, but that really is where Laloux sees the next evolution. But the tension is between the orange and green. That's why a lot of people, agile leaders that Matt and I talk to, their great frustration is they're doing great stuff on the ground. These line managers who really make change happen. But senior management keep coming in, command and control, and they kind of, mess things up. So that tension is there, live and kicking right now in many organizations, and hopefully this very simple model will help people to sort of grapple with the context within which they sit, because that's really what's going on.
Could you see that as a generation thing as well, though?
Well, I think that would be a huge
sweeping statement. Probably.
Yeah, I think it's a huge generalization. I mean, we have met some remarkable 50 plus somethings who are doing incredible things. I do think, though, that as an older generation, we've inherited these habits of leadership that are challenging to undo. Yeah. I think that would be a probably fair thing to say, and I don't think anybody would be offended by that. The newer generation of people coming into the workforce think very differently. They're extraordinary people to work with. And so this is why it's such an exciting time. When I said right at the start of the webinar that Senge was talking about this, we're in a shift in age from mechanistic to organic, you could probably say that's very similar to what Laloux is showing here in this model, from orange to green.
Okay. And it seems that obviously we've jumped sort of a curve as well, really, haven't we? Looking at the competition and the profit and the objectives and that side of things.
I mean, profit maximization has brought some benefits, and it's also brought organizations that don't fundamentally care very much about their people. That has been a reality for many, many people in the workforce. With the sort of green level, what you're looking at is organizations who genuinely understand that their people are where the magic happens. It's where innovation happens. It's everything that we see in this world started somewhere in an idea in between the ears of a human being somewhere in an organization. Okay, so if that is true, then as leaders, we need to be expert at people, not experts at process. That's the big change.
And that's just a fantastic way of putting it, because I couldn't have said it better, really.
Thanks very much.
Fantastic at people. There we go. Wrap up webinar.
Yeah. Okay, we're all done. Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is so from 1998 to 2010, I spent 12 years in an organisation which very much supported sort of the green, if you like, very value-led consultancy. When I joined, I was employee number 35, I think. We went on to be the biggest independent consultancy in the UK. We were very successful. On my second day, I asked one of the directors, said, have you got any advice for me here, Mike? And he said to me, listen, Matt, the envelope here is pretty big. Do what you think is right. If you step outside the envelope, I'll let you know. I didn't really speak to him again in the next 12 years, to be honest. We made stuff up as a group. We did some fantastic innovation, some awesome stuff, and pretty much the values are pretty much lived by the leaders too. And a couple of guys I still talk to now, and very inspirational. Pretty much made sure they turned up every day and lived the values really, and made sure that's throughout the organisation. And I think we could probably all recount that, and it happened, and we turned up on site like that, and I think that made a big difference. And delivery was a big part of what we did. We went over and above for delighting customers, and we were massively engaged in what we were doing. And like I said, we became very successful at the end of it, and yeah, commercially too. So.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about Laszlo.
So if you just bring up this quote, I think really it reiterates what I said earlier, that when faced with a problem, do you at the appropriate time step in and lead, and just as critically, do you step back and stop leading? Because what's critical to be an effective leader in this environment is you have to be willing to relinquish power. I use the word authority rather than power, but really what we're saying is that if as a leader a process isn't working, then absolutely it's right to go in with your toolkit and try and fix the process. But if you try and fix people, you're going to get yourself into a little bit more trouble. It's more complex. It's not simply pulling levers or changing Kanban boards and that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, we know how to nurture close friendships. We know how to nurture and develop relationships. We're just afraid of bringing those skills into the workplace, but they're actually the skills that we need. And Laszlo really is just reiterating that. Wisdom's important, and wisdom has grown over time. So there you go. That's I think he's one of the smartest thinkers about culture and leadership and employee experience, people experience, as he would call it. So I think he captures the mood of what we're talking about today really well.
And it's interesting, he's Google obviously as well, isn't he?
He's now set up his own organization called Humu. Nobody quite knows yet what they're about to do, but he's bringing what I would call systems thinking, positive psychology, neuroscience, behavioral and social psychology, many of the things that Matt and I talk about into systems and interventions for larger organizations. That is broadly what he's working on at the minute. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with.
That's
be game changing,
definitely. We should probably mention regarding Google the Project Aristotle, because that sort of folds into this as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. So and I'm at the conference. Google are going to be at the conference,
they
aren't they?
Indeed.
Well,
yes,
there you go.
absolutely.
So I won't take their thunder, but Project Aristotle was a really important piece of research about what makes teams really thrive. And the number one finding, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, was psychological safety. And that's kind of pretty profound because, this kind of what I would call social psychology research rarely is it done at this kind of scale, organization like this. But it's really supported. Even Simon Sinek, his book, Leaders Eat Last, talks a lot about the impact of psychological safety at a neurochemical perspective. And when we don't feel safe, we're running on cortisol. So for all of the listeners today who are in environments where there's politicking, where there's backbiting, where there's lack of sharing of resources or skills or knowledge, if there's silos, they're all classic kind of symptoms of a cortisol environment. When you've got oxytocin running around, and there's I may come to this later, but the guy who really broke the news about the impact of oxytocin, it increases collaboration, it increases the sort of team cohesion, it increases innovation and creativity and all that kind of stuff. you don't have a lot of oxytocin floating around if there isn't psychological safety in a team or in an organization. So it's amazing that Google found in Project Aristotle that was their #1 finding.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we're delighted they're going to be at the conference as well, and they're going to be talking about all of that research that they've done. So it will be very, very interesting for everybody to join in that session. So that will be fantastic. And it is all about psychological safety, and I think that's what they're going to be talking about as well.
So there are a number of elements, and psychological safety was the one that came out as #1 in terms of importance. I can't remember the others off the top of my head.
I think they're also talking about teams as well, psychological safety in teams, which I thought was quite interesting as well.
It has to be at team level and an organizational level.
Yeah. Matt, you're obviously very familiar about these issues as well, aren't you?
That's right, yes. I think, Alan, you got it spot on, really. Yeah, it was all about, that was their one main finding across all the teams I look at. I mean, Google do teams very well. And I think the one thing they did find out above and beyond anything else inside the teams, what made those high-performing teams was that psychological safety, bringing them whole selves to work and sharing a bit of their personal background and history too. That really helps sort of form the teams, really, to get them more high-performing, as it were.
Yep. So the others were dependability, I trust my team members, structure and clarity. So Matt and I talked earlier about, so if everybody wants to scribble these down, if they don't already know them, meaning is, what I do matters.
Yes.
An impact on making a difference. So they were the Aristotle findings: psychological safety, #1, dependability, I trust my team members, structure and clarity. I have a sense of meaning in what I do, and impact. I'm actually making a difference in what I do.
And in terms of leadership, those values ring true?
Yeah, look, in my personal experience, that leaders who are able to create an environment that allows these things to flourish are always perceived as phenomenal leaders. This is such a different, look, in the old days, we would have been talking about profit, throughput, turnover, speed, all of these kind of things, and that's not what Google have found. This is very different. So to be able to create an environment where these things flourish means that as leaders we need a different toolkit.
Okay, so we're back to the leader again, looking at themselves, understanding themselves, and then being able to show that, really, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay, well, we're going to do a poll now. So we'd like some interaction, actually, from everybody out there. So I'm just going to set the poll in motion. Let's think. What we'd like you to do is actually consider what is your top challenge as a leader. Obviously, we've got lots of leaders out there listening, and sometimes you're kind of thrust into that position of being a leader, aren't you? Sometimes you have the initiative in a group, like you say, in the team environment, to kind of step up and say, well, someone needs to do this, and let's move on. But other times, you're obviously thrust into that position. So there's different types of leaders out there, obviously. So let's launch the poll and see if you can ask what is your top challenge as a leader. Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. Let's put that out and see if you can just reply to that. What we've got is motivation and engagement. Obviously, if motivation and engagement is low, then it's going to be a very hard challenge to influence anybody and get anybody to work with you on anything. Underperformance, that's obviously somewhat of an issue as well. Staff turnover, that's right. If staff keep turning over and you're losing people, that's going to create certain frictions, and obviously the work's going to be stalled in lots of areas, so you're not going to be able to get a lot of things done. And then obviously when new staff join, you've got that whole bedding in sort of process, haven't you, when you get to know your staff again, and again understand them as a person, not just as an employee, as Alan mentioned earlier. So that's a really important element to look at. Also as well, obviously incentivizing. We haven't really touched on that, have we? But there is research out there around incentivizing, isn't there? And the importance of it?
Yeah, so I think the hand grenade under the table was Dan Pink's book, Drive, what really motivates people. Because I think we tended to look at incentives in purely financial terms, so bonuses and that kind of thing. What has happened is a sort of a review of what really incentivizes people, you know, and it can be very broad and it's very personal, so it's much more bespoke than what we originally thought. So you know, if you're in a low-paid job where you're doing repetitive stuff, then it's some kind of financial bonus does make a difference. But in the kind of environments that most of us are working in, where creativity, innovation, and collaboration and so on are so important, then actually the incentive piece changes quite dramatically. So we do know of a company who do one of their incentives is they've got this kind of glass jar in the middle of the office, a glass jar, and everyone's allowed to put in their kind of dream, you know, one dream holiday or something like that, little dream. And when the company hits certain profit numbers, two people are allowed to just put their hand in the jar and pull out their little dream. And you know, people go off to work in Africa and all kinds of stuff. And the impact it has on everybody else, not just on the two people, is huge. Because obviously they give an update and tell people where they're at and what they're doing and so on. So you know, that's a kind of simple example, but it can be something as simple as just saying thank you and saying that in a very public way. Gratitude is one of the most powerful, positive interventions that we know of, and it's one of the least used.
Interesting.
So it not only affects the person who, so let's say I'm saying thank you, Jenny, for all of the hard work. It has a positive impact on you, raises your oxytocin level. It raises my oxytocin level as the person being grateful. And if somebody witnesses that, their oxytocin level goes up too.
Right.
So emotions, we are an emotionally contagious environment. The more leaders start to understand that, the more successful they will be.
Okay, that's interesting. We like oxytocin. We need more of that. Absolutely. The other thing we should touch on as well, obviously, we were talking about the tips for leadership. Obviously, the leader, it's good to get to know themselves. But there's something to be said, surely, for getting an understanding and those sort of levels of understanding of the employees that you're working with, because obviously there's different tools that are out there to actually look at their sort of makeup of what sort of person they are. Would you advise leaders to look at that with their employees?
Absolutely.
And with their team members?
Yeah, because I mean, we all need to understand each other's internal worlds. There's a guy that Matt and I are big fans of called John Gottman, who's an expert scientist, social scientist who focuses on relationships. But some of his work can be taken over into the organizational context easily. And he talked about one of the key and most important things about healthy relationships is you understand each other's internal worlds. Now, what tends to happen in workplaces, we only understand each other as professionals and don't really understand each other as human beings. And so there are lots of different exercises. Matt and I use exercises like job recrafting, which comes from Amy Rizanewski, who's at Yale. And is what does give you a sense of meaning in your life? You know, my coworker, and how can we use that to recraft what you do on a day-to-day basis to make it more meaningful? So there are lots of different tools, strengths-based working as well. You know, what are my strengths? And we're not just talking about communication skills and stuff like that. But people have, you know, some people are just amazingly empathetic. Some people are amazing at, you know, coaching and developing other people, but not necessarily have the proper title for that. The moment that people start using some of that strength in their day-to-day job, it not only positively impacts them in their day-to-day job, it actually impacts them outside of work too, positively. So there are different tools. Matt, is there any other kind of tools or interventions off the top of your head that you would throw in?
I think just a few tips. I suppose just the conversation has been having around tips for leadership is creating the environment for people to flourish. And I think definitely talking on understanding people's internal workings. Peter Singer talks about mental models as well, and allowing people to challenge their own mental models, because you're going to have to work collaboratively with someone else. You've got to see their perspective. There's quite a lot of the coaching work, the relationship coaching work that helps you see other perspectives, to get a bit of empathy, to at least sort of move forward together, because people take too often take positions where they're not willing to compromise. And so it's kind of how do we work together going forward from that. And I think that's where a lot of conflict comes up. It's interesting coming out in the poll there. And I think definitely just pulling on people's some coaching organizations call it resonance. How do you get people to resonate with the world around them? How do you get them to resonate with their own strengths, values, passions? And quite a lot of the tools we use, like Alan was just saying, it helps to uncover those kind of things, strength finder stuff, anything around values, that kind of stuff. And I think like if you pull on that, people tend to be more engaged. And then other people found that too. And then from that, you can take a bit more energy, a bit more oxytocin around. People like to be valued, really. So just making sure that engagement gets kept up around that. And as a leader, trying to create that environment. And I don't see that too often in organizations. And it really does. I see it in teams every so often. I ask this question for people I train quite a lot. You know, think about a great project or a good project. What made it successful? It's all around the people interactions, really, more than anything else. And people feel engaged in the work they're doing and feel they're making a difference as well. So all the stuff we've just been talking about, really, the Google pieces as well. And interesting, that also gets supported by a guy called Richard Hackman, who's written a lot on teams, leading teams, and all the same stuff that Google have come up with. Richard Hackman has spent 30 years researching, unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but it all comes back to the same stuff that keeps getting brought up again and again.
Fantastic. So that's a real core element then, isn't it? To allow people to really work to their strengths.
Definitely, yeah. There's an awful lot out there. I think there's been quite a lot for a company called organisation called VIA, who've actually defined some of these things like social intelligence, teamwork, fairness, leadership, forgiveness, humility, prudence.
It's a form of profiling almost, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. But I suppose more about understanding yourself, and actually it's amazing what you can do when you understand a bit. I think sometimes you've got that thing that just says, I'm interested in this. I can't understand why. And I think generally a love of learning is what a lot of people, it makes them sort of feel quite engaged and they get a lot of energy from it. Just uncovering the fact that actually, if you'd love to learn and actually understanding that and making sure you listen to it, don't listen over time, you can become a bit, you don't resonate as much with the world. Let's face it, you feel a bit depressed potentially, and not that oxytocin doesn't kick off because you feel you're missing something.
Sure.
Understanding a lot of coaching approaches, and I think like Alan was talking about, people understand themselves. You're more likely to have more energy because you're feeding things that feed your soul, if you like. It sounds a bit.
Sure. No, it makes sense though. I mean, that's the thing. We're all human beings in this world, and that does make sense. So as a leader, to identify those in your team, those elements to allow people to shine, can only benefit, can't it?
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, well, that's really interesting points there we're covering. We've closed our poll now, and it's quite interesting that 40% of everyone listening says the number one challenge really in being a leader, they really feel is motivation and engagement. And we're obviously covering that right as we speak, aren't we? Yeah. It's to allow people to shine.
So I would love to sit down with everyone individually and ask about context and that kind of thing. I think one, I'll talk about a couple of themes and then I'll hand over to Matt. One of the things I see consistently is that people are becoming more and more tired, burnt out. That the idea is that with Agile, we can squeeze the orange a bit harder and get more juice out. Because the senior leadership are still working in command and control with things, and it's all about improving productivity, for example. That is a really challenging environment to be in. So we see a lot of people who are working very hard, a lot, over and over again. That is going to have an impact on engagement. And I think that the line leader or the people who are responding, who feel that there will be things outside of their control, my assumption is, that drive them bananas. And so my instinct is that part of what's going on is to do with context rather than to do with the capacity of the people who are on this webinar, because they're interested and obviously are people who are developing their skills, and that's why they've shown up. So therefore then my general response is I guess it's a lot to do with context and how people feel they're being treated, and perception is everything. It's profoundly important. It's not about It's not about actual facts in many cases when it comes to how people are motivated and engaged. It's how they perceive the world of work that they're in. If they don't feel they're being listened to, if they don't feel there's psychological safety, if they don't feel there's real clarity in what they're doing, if they've seen friends being made redundant last year, anything like that will have an enormous impact on levels of engagement and motivation. Now, if you are a leader who's commanding control, if you tend to be a bit robust when you're under the pump, that will also have an enormous impact. So I won't shy away from that. But I would love to know more about the context of the organization within which these wonderful people sit. So look, if you want to improve engagement, there are 1,000 different things you can do. There are some people who you'll never be able to do it with, right? So I'm somebody who's been leading people since I was 18. There will always be people who aren't going to come on the bus. So the best phrase I heard was from a guy who runs a super successful fish and chip shop. And every day he says to his staff, if you're not happy being here, right, life's too short, go and find somewhere else where you would be happy. And I think that's really great. It's very simple but important advice. So there'll always be the 1%, 5%. But for those who are struggling, sit down and have a coffee with them and talk at a human level about what's going on. Find out what really makes them tick, what their strengths are, what they've been good at. I would ask a very simple question is, can you just bring me back to a time when you were doing really well in an organization? Just explain what was going on and then listen. And I'll guarantee they will give you some hints as to what you can do to help improve their level of engagement. Now, there's lots of interventions Matt and I could rattle off, but just do that one simple, practical thing, and it will be a good start. Matt?
I think what's interesting about the poll is that actually underperformance has come up too.
Right.
And what's interesting, I think the two are tied together somewhat. So I talk to a lot of people, I do a lot of courses, talk to a lot of different organizations, and coaching wise, agile coaching wise, a lot of organizations, I find one of the biggest things that comes up time and time again is that the demand for the business or the expectation of how much the delivery part of the organization can deliver is 3 or 4 times more than actually is. And so what's interesting is they're maybe not the context people are sat in now off this poll, but I find quite an awful lot of the expectations too high from the business, and actually the people delivering it can't ever deliver that much. So what I spend quite a lot of my time doing is help we understand what the capacity of the delivery organization actually is, and then work from there with a conversation, rather than taking positions on that as well. And I suppose that if people are under the cosh all the time and it's never good enough, then that's going to affect motivation and engagement as well. And probably those kind of stress levels are going to affect conflict as well, because I think generally what happens when the stress is too high, emotions get high, and so what happens then is with bundles of emotion just kick up against each other quite a lot. It's like kids in a school playground sometimes. So I think,
you speak from experience, Matt.
yeah. I'd be guilty with that too. I think if people get too stressful, they'd say things in a way that maybe doesn't help a relationship going forward. And I think that helps about understanding yourself, understanding your own, so about how you then react in that to actually then sort of, like I say, actions speak louder than words on the first principles, really. So yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned conflict, because that's there in tied second place really with underperformance, and we haven't really touched on the conflict issues yet. But obviously, if leaders have conflict in their teams, resolving that's quite a hard task, isn't it?
I think what's interesting there is you need conflict to get anything. It's the energy that drives stuff forward. So when there's conflict, things need to change somewhere. It's a signal that things need to change.
Okay.
Handled well, it can be done in a way where you don't get what's called toxic behaviours. And so John and Julie Gottman were quite good at this, actually. One of the other things they brought up as well is they run the Love Lab in California in the 70s or 80s, and they got couples together, and he reckoned they could, based on the interaction behaviours that are going on, they could actually predict with about 89% accuracy whether the couple would stay together or not. And if toxic behaviours come up, things like blame, stonewalling, you have to help me here, Alan. I'm going to run out of stuff. Blame, stonewalling.
Hold on a sec. You tested my memory. Defensiveness and criticism.
Defensiveness, sorry, yeah.
And as well.
And contempt. If those things are showing up a lot, what's happening is with the conflict, it's not being had well. So it's the bundles of emotion we kick up against it. That won't help healthy relationships build and go forward together. So it's actually understanding, okay, let's take a little deep breath here. How do we want to act together? Have some shared values around that. And then from there, start to have sort of engagement across everyone, the deep democracy, the shared understanding, if you like, the shared input, to actually agree something we can all move together with. And that's covered by Patrick Lynch's model as well, around the 5 dysfunctions of the team, is that team agreement on things together. Because once everyone agrees together, they can move forward on it, even if it's just a set of principles or values around that. And I think that's important then, is actually then being in a place where continually you can really harness and actually take forward that emergent change and handle it well, because it's not going to go away really. So I think it's how to handle emergent change well, yeah, and keep having that engagement ongoing. I think that's the trick with leadership generally.
Okay, can we touch a little bit also on staff turnover, because we've had a question through about staff turnover. So obviously if there's a leader out there that's listening that's having an issue with staff turnover, maybe they've only just joined an organisation and people haven't been happy and people are leaving. Obviously, you need to embed yourself into that organisation. So you've got some tricky situations there, haven't you, to work through. You obviously want people to get inspired by your role in leadership and what you're doing, and bring that oxytocin levels back up. But in the same time, people are probably walking out the door. So can we talk a little bit about those issues?
So I'll hand over to Matt in a second, but staff turnover is a symptom of a different problem. And I think one of the things that I used to say when I was looking after 100 plus managers is, the symptoms are never the problem. There's always something else going on, and and what we do is we accidentally address the symptom, which is staff turnover, when actually there's a different issue. And so it's a challenging one to answer without knowing the specifics, is the honest truth. But something at a fundamental level is not happening, and that's why people are leaving all the time. So when we talked earlier about, if we could nail down 2 things that really make a difference, or 3 things, Paul Zak was the person, Dr. Paul Zak, who understood the impact of oxytocin, and he actually injected people with synthetic oxytocin, which is hilarious, and he managed to get away with it, and got people collaborating. And his research has been done in places like Zappos, all the way through to indigenous people in Papua New Guinea, and he's seen the same kind of impact of oxytocin. He said there are 2 really important things that leaders need to address: trust and a sense of purpose. And my instinct is that when the staff turnover, trust is missing, we'll find that what they're doing is meaningless. Now, there may be other things going on, like they're under the pump, there's unreasonable expectations, there's no sense of collaboration and trust or whatever. But or maybe the leader's struggling to retain people because they don't quite have the skills yet. So it's a hard one to answer without understanding the specifics, but I want to use general terms so people can walk away and say, right, so trust and purpose are important. Yes, they'll increase people's energy. This is Paul's research, 106%. They're 76% more engaged, people who have trust and a sense of purpose, 50% more productive, and here's a big one: half the employee turnover of organizations that don't have levels of trust and a sense of purpose, and 13% fewer sick days. So they're hard numbers. And really that's all I want to say on that, because I'm very conscious of time. Matt, and is there anything you want to add? Because turnover is something that we do see a reasonable amount.
I think something you said earlier on around being on the bus, there's going to be just a level of turnover anyway, sort of background turnovers, whether it's too high, if you like. So I've been lucky enough to work at the BBC for about 7 or 8 years now, and I had a chat with one of the leaders there a while ago, and they were talking about what really gets people to stay there is a level of, they really focus on growth for individuals. They bring people on board and really support learning and growth, and their learning program is just amazing. And I think what's interesting is they said, look, actually there comes a point somewhere where the money we pay isn't great, but actually some people stay around because they love what we do. Their purpose is well aligned with what we do as the BBC, therefore they're going to stay longer. Other people get to the point where actually they're going to take it and go somewhere else. I think some people come back again. They go to organisations where they realise maybe the money's more, but actually the culture just isn't very healthy, or they don't enjoy it. I find that quite a lot with financial organisations. That's not to say everyone's like that. I've seen some ones that have been very well run and well engaging. I think also just there company I work for quite a long time, the consultancy, and also looking at other consultancies, a lot of them it's around the growth thing. I think the trust in leaders, the values that are there, and I think the key thing is as well, like you say, making a difference. Having experienced it myself and seeing the difference you can make, and other organisations that see that difference, like the BBC, like there's other organisations out there. We work with one down in Brighton, and seeing the way they work, and they very much focus on growth and creating a great atmosphere for people. And I think that the challenge is going to be if your turnover is quite high at the moment, potentially, and you want to try and bring that down, is how do you change that whole culture potentially? So it might just be a churn that's there anyway, or depending on the organisation too, depending on the industry that you're in, it might be, is it above average or not? I think if you compare yourself to other organisations in the same industry, rather than saying our turnover is too high, it might be different for different areas, different industries, as it were.
So it's really interesting on the BBC News a couple of days ago, they did a piece about the fact that productivity start going up in the UK, and they interviewed a bunch of people who work for a fiberglass factory, and they across the board said, yeah, we've all been offered money. One guy said, I've been offered double the money I'm working here to go and work with my friend. He said, but I'd rather stay here because I really love the place. And they all said the same thing. And that's really important. So staff turnover doesn't increase when people are happy.
No, sure.
So, and it's the human issues that trigger staff turnover, 99% of the time.
It's interesting you talk about trust, because obviously the Agile, one of the Agile elements is trust and transparency, isn't it?
It is.
And that's a huge thing.
And it is. And I think the Agile Manifesto is fascinating, because the first thing it says is individuals and interactions over people and over process.
So you say it right.
Yeah, thanks very much. And although even though the process and the tools are important, we say the bit on the left is more important, which is individual interactions.
Yeah.
We're not saying anything different. It's just what we've done in the Consortium is put together 9 principles, and we built leadership training around it, which has all of the people science at individual and collective level that has been missing from basically my career. I didn't know any of this. I didn't even know it existed until 8 years ago. So this is the stuff, in terms of wisdom and growing ourselves from the inside out. The whole training process was designed with that in mind. So it was really about ensuring, we went through the slides quickly, people require meaning and purpose to make work fulfilling. Every indicator in business, productivity, engagement, morale, etc., goes up when people feel that what they do matters.
Of course.
But how do you actually make that come to life? Well, we go into the science and then the tools of making that come to life. So each of those emotions is a foundation to enhance creativity or improve all your thinking leads to improved outcomes. There is enormous science behind why these are part of the 9 principles.
Yes.
And they work. So
yes.
So that's why we built the training program that we built.
Absolutely. And we should probably go back to the 9 principles of Agile Leadership, because the resources that we have on the website, on the Consortium website, are vast in this area. The white paper is there, and there's details on each of the principles written out in some detail for everybody to have a look at. So all our resources are on the website under resources, agilebusiness.org. So if you're interested in looking at more content on this, please go to our resources on the website, because there's lots more information there for you. But what we'll also do in the follow-up email that I'll be sending out to this webinar, I'll also include a link there for you as well, so it will all be easy for you to grab. Now, the other thing we should mention also is all the authors that you've been mentioning.
Yes.
We've had a few questions through saying that would be really good to get some more information. Can Alan jot some of these names down? And so can we possibly include some of these, please, in the follow-up email as well?
Yeah.
So we've given Alan a bit of a task there.
That's okay. Well, Matt and I actually do have this
live and breathe this kind of stuff.
Well, we do, because I guess what drives us, our sense of meaning and purpose, comes from the fact that Matt and I want to see organizations where everybody wins.
Of course.
So every stakeholder, the employers, the leaders, the shareholders, the customers, the suppliers, and so on and so forth. So we do have a reading list that I've put together. Probably needs a bit of an update, because I guess we never stop. learning either. So Paul Zach's work is pretty new to me, although I knew a lot about the kind of oxytocin impacts from Simon Sinek's work. So I will try and put something together, and if people do have specific challenges, then that's my email address, and either Matt or myself will get back to you and help whichever way we can. We will be at the conference, so please come and see us at the conference, and
absolutely
buy me a cup of green tea and ask me a few questions. We're always happy to help.
That's all right. There's coffee stations. It's
Absolutely,
free. You can just take it along.
That's there you go. Even better.
Yeah, the conference is on the 26th and 27th of September in Bishopsgate in London, 155 Bishopsgate, the Etc. Venues location there in London. So we'll be there for 2 days. All the information regarding our conference is obviously on the website, and it's also got its own website, agileconference.org. So if you need any more information on the conference at all, or even if you had any more questions regarding today's webinar, please send them through to us. We really do like to keep our conversations and discussions flowing here on our webinar series. So if there's anything that you're not quite sure about, you want a little bit more detail about, then please send it through to us. We're more than happy to follow up on these questions in emails at a later date. That's absolutely fine. Also, I should mention that the Consortium are working on a program on Agile Leadership as well. So this is a very evolving topic within the Consortium that I know Alan's working on with the work group as well. So it's, like you say, it's a very exciting time. I mean, we feel like we've gone full circle, really, from where we started this morning,
yes,
talking about the mechanistic through to the organic.
Yes.
But it is a very exciting time, and we started on those words, so it's probably quite apt in a way that we maybe close on those words as well. So we're all working in this space. It's a very exciting space. It's what makes us, or defines us really as humans, because we can't lose that element, can we? We are humans, we all have feelings, and we need to put that into our work, and we need to understand people a lot more. I think that's come through very, very strongly this morning.
I think in the information age, if that's the age that we're in, we're probably going past that now as well. The defining critical success factor is the human beings who work in our organizations. And that's really it, in a nutshell. And so if that is the case, then stop treating them like robots, the big organizations that do, and start treating them as human beings. The moment that you do that, magic happens. Magic happens. And we've seen it now. It's been proven over and over again with various case studies, but now it's been reinforced with a lot of research from the scientific community too.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alan. Matt, have you got any final words for us? Any words of wisdom?
Oh, that's a question. I think just to echo what you already said, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think
highlight it. It was very good. Oh, fair enough. Well, listen. Thank you so much, Matt, for being there with us today. It was a lovely suggestion for you to join us. So I really do appreciate your time joining the webinar and for your input and for your experience, what you've gifted us today. So thank you very much for being there.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. And also, Alan, thank you for your time this morning and your insights into Agile leadership. We've certainly touched on, obviously, a lot of the principles that are in the 9 principles of Agile leadership. We've touched on some of that DNA stuff as well. We've got those 7 elements of DNA, the cultural DNA that we've all got. As I said, there's loads more information there on our resources page on the website. So, Alan, thank you for joining us. I know this is a topic so dear to your heart and you literally live and breathe it. And we really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. And like I said, we had to answer questions on a general basis. So please, if there is a specific challenge, just drop me an email, and Matt and I will respond.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. That's great. So our next webinar then is on Thursday, the 20th of September. It starts at 11 a.m. in the morning. I'm joined by Patrick Hooverstadt, who is the author of Patterns of Strategy. And surprise, surprise, we're going to be talking about agile principles to strategy. He's actually joining us at the conference as well, actually.
Fantastic.
So it's amazing. We're getting all our conference amazing thought leaders and speakers into the studio to talk to us. So, please register for that one. I think it's going to be quite phenomenal. Patrick really is a thought leader in this space of strategy. So join us for that one, the 20th of September at 11 a.m. But from me, Jenny Bailey, thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate your company. We're keeping the conversations flowing, as you know. So like Alan and Matt says, no problem at all for you to send your questions in to us. But from me for now, we have gone a little bit over time. We do apologise for that, but thank you for staying with us this morning. We really do appreciate it. So goodbye for now, and we'll talk to you again.